Thanks, Moira. It's always interesting to talk to someone who knows what he's talking about. That's not always the case. But when it comes to statistics, you can't argue with statistics, although you can manipulate statistics. Right, Bradley Wright?
Yes.
Right, Bradley Wright. Bradley Wright's our guest, PhD. Written a book called Upside, Surprising Good News About the State of Our World. Now, you don't teach statistics, but you're a sociologist. But
I am a sociologist.
But you know how to work with statistics, and you've done an amazing statistical overview in your book here. Like, there's more graphs than Carter says pills, and most of them I can understand, not all of them. But your essential thesis is things aren't as bad as they seem.
Well, absolutely. What I wanted to do, Jim, with this book is to basically find out how things are going in the world on things that most people tend to care about. And I tried to start off agnostic, not in terms of my faith, but in terms of the results. And what I found is that many things in the world are going much better than we think.
Yeah, which, you know, is a surprise because all of us are subject to newscasts and newspapers and the web. And it seems that almost everything that's coming our way is doom and gloom.
Well, absolutely.
But you say that's because doom and gloom sells.
Absolutely. You know, if you want to attract viewers, if you want to get people to read your books or read your articles, a good way to do it is to have doom and gloom. Bad news, Jim, is very useful. And that's why we hear so much of it. But that doesn't mean it represents what's really happening in the world.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure that you're going to have more than a few people reacting to some of the things you say in this book. I appreciate the fact that you support pretty much everything with stats, and you also have a very extensive page of references and notes, which I think is great. It's very academic in that sense. But let's you know, I've highlighted things throughout the book, and I mean, so much of this interests me. But let's start from the beginning. You talk about the essential pessimism that is out there about, and your focus mainly is the U.S. You mentioned Canada twice.
Okay.
I won't take it personally, but you mentioned Canada twice, Bradley. But anyway, most about the U.S. and the world. Why the pessimism?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that in part we're pessimistic because that's what we hear. You know, it's hard to evaluate your city, your state, your nation, your world just from where you stand, so you rely on what people tell you. And as I said, we hear a lot more bad news than is actually happening. I would say also there's a sense of nostalgia. And we remember the good things from the past, and we're aware of the bad things today. And so as a result, we tend to think that things are getting worse.
But the good things of the past aren't necessarily good. I mean, we tend to look at the past through kind of tinted lenses, do we not?
Absolutely. So we look at the past with nostalgia. Jackie Gleason said the past remembers a lot better than it lived. So I had someone tell me that if they could turn back the clock, they'd want to go back to the 1950s. So I said, well, do you want to take away voting rights from most African Americans? Do you want to take away job privileges from many women? Do you want to lower the life expectancy rate by about 10 years? Do you want to increase double poverty? And suddenly, the 1950s wasn't, you know, so much the happy days.
But that's the point. We think of the 50s in terms of the TV show Happy Days,
Absolutely.
or Leave It to Beaver, or My Three Sons.
Yeah, or
right?
The Greatest Generation.
The Greatest Generation.
Now, there's no doubt there were good things about the 1950s. You know, there's rapid economic growth in America, and I think that's what people sort of key on. But we're still much better off economically now than we were in the 50s.
Now, that's an interesting point. In the book, you talk about the economy and the essential standard of living that we have. And I was surprised, actually, when you compared current standard of living with standard of living, you know, back 50 years ago. The assumption always is we were better off then, you know, in terms of taking inflation into account and all that kind of stuff than we are now. But you prove very definitely that we're better off now.
Yeah, it's not even close. Yeah. Today's American families have over 2.5 times more income than in the 1950s, adjusted for inflation. Now, I don't know about you, Jim, but I think most people, if their boss came to them and said, I'd like to double your income and then add some more, they might say yes. But that's what's happened to most American families.
Yeah. Now, of course, people would counter that by saying, yeah, but the cost of things has gone up. I mean, I remember I used to buy a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, you know, and now it's $1.50, $2, depending on where you buy it. So costs have gone up.
Well, certainly not adjusting for inflation, but once you adjust for inflation, you see a lot of things are cheaper. So when I was 18, I flew to Europe. It cost me $500. That's about what it would cost now, maybe a little bit more, but it's much cheaper now once you adjust for inflation. Some economists look at how many minutes you have to work to pay for essential items, and they found that today, with most things, you work fewer minutes to pay for them, for oranges, chickens, Levi's, going to the movies and so forth, than you did in past decades. And so,
How about gasoline? Are we paying more or less for gas than we did in the 50s?
do you know, I don't know the answer to that.
No. I hope we're paying less because I drive a truck. One of your chapters is, are we dumber than we used to be? And I found that fascinating. You get into IQ tests, and this one guy down in New Zealand who,
Flynn.
The Flynn effect, you call it, who studied IQs around the world. Are we getting smarter or are we getting dumber?
Well, we're certainly better educated. So in the States, 50 years ago, maybe half of American adults did not have 4 years of high school. Now it's almost universal. Almost all American adults do. In terms of the quality of education, it seems to be improving. IQ scores are on their way up, and they have been across the world for about 6 or 7 decades now.
Now, to what do the experts credit this rise in IQ tests? Is it better nutrition? Is it better education? Is it something in the water?
Well, probably all the above. There's a number of competing explanations for it. One has to do with the test itself, but kids today are exposed to a lot more stimulus. They're exposed to a lot more of the world. You know, so a kid in Atlanta, Georgia, can watch your show on YouTube, whereas they couldn't 40 years ago.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the reasons, plus good nutrition.
Now, you also mentioned in the book all of the time that North Americans are spending watching television.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to me counterintuitive that a kid who's watching, say, 40 or 50 hours of television a week is actually improving in terms of his IQ. But are you suggesting that all of these various media stimuli are contributing to that rise in IQ? Or is it something else?
It could be something else. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating the increase in television watching is a good thing.
No.
So in this book, what I try to do is document what's getting better and what's getting worse. There are some things getting worse, and from my value system, the sheer volume of television that people watch and how that's increasing all the time is a negative thing.
Now, one of the things that's getting worse, and in fact America leads the world, is in incarceration rates.
Yeah.
Like, I was shocked when you described the prisons this way. You said if all of the prisoners were gathered in one place, it'd be the 4th largest city in the U.S. After Chicago.
Yes, but ahead of Houston, Atlanta, other major cities.
And most, I suppose, the critical mass of those behind bars are related to the drug trade, right?
Absolutely. That was the big change trade in the 70s and 80s, was the drug war. And the strategy used was to incarcerate people who used or sold drugs. And that drove the massive increase in incarceration. So now the United States incarcerates a greater percentage of its people than any other country in the world. I mean, we really are USA #1 in this area.
I heard one cynic say that we should come up with another plan instead of imprisoning drug dealers, because when you imprison a drug dealer, you're just making a work opening. You know, because somebody else is going to fill that in right away, right? Yeah. Because of the insatiable hunger for drugs in the U.S. Now, you didn't address that, and I'll just throw it at you anyway. Why? Why do you suppose, you know, in the most prosperous land in the world, there is this huge appetite for drugs?
Well, first, let me qualify your question, Jim, by pointing out that drug use seems to be going down.
Now, you did mention that.
So in the last 20, 30 years, high school seniors are using drugs less often than they used to be. So that is some good news. And you wouldn't know that just reading newspapers or watching television or just listening to people talk. As to why there's so much drug use, boy, that's a good question. Why is there so much alcoholism in some countries? You know, why is there... and that's, to paraphrase President Obama, I think that's above my pay rank to answer questions like that. That's
but
very philosophical.
It is a big question. Are we sicker than we used to be? There's a lot of talk about disease, a lot of talk about pandemics and afflictions worldwide. Are we better off or worse off?
Better off, unquestionably. If there's one area that is good news, it's this. So let me give you an example. In 1900, a baby born in the United States could expect to live less than 50 years. 1950, mid-60s. Now, late 70s. So that's an increase of what, 30, 35 years, in just a century of life expectancy. One commentator said that that was the biggest accomplishment, the most impressive accomplishment in all of human history, increasing life expectancy that much. You know, if nothing else changed, that alone should get us smiling every day.
Yeah, and you mentioned when you're discussing that in the book that if you reach 60 or 70 years of age, chances are you're going to live far beyond that 78 threshold, right?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, you have a guest in the studio who's 94 years old.
Yeah.
We'll see him here at 100.
Yeah.